This happened back in 2014 when I was around 18 or 19. It was summer vacation and I had just graduated from high school along with my best friend at the time, Gavin. Life was kind of like what you'd expect after high school. We were young and dumb, and we were sort of in that phase where you weren't sure what path to take. Most of our friends went to college, but I'll be honest, I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. This happened in the middle of June, and Gavin and I had planned to spend a night out on his uncle's beach house in Maine. We lived in Massachusetts at the time, so the drive to Maine wasn't at all a hassle. Gavin had told me that his uncle was away for a work company event and that we were more than welcome to use the house. The house was located on a private beach, so we wouldn't have a problem with other beachgoers. Gavin and I spent the whole day together, and as soon as night hit, he recommended we set up a bonfire on the beach and have a few beers. Even though we weren't 21 yet, we still saw it as a way to just live it up as a sort of celebration. All those years of constant stress and homework would finally be behind us, which allowed us to enjoy ourselves. Anyway, Gavin and I gathered some firewood from his uncle's house and used it to make a pretty big fire. Gavin starts blasting his tunes while handing me a beer and starts babbling on about some girl he's been talking to. While I was happy for him, I wasn't that interested in being involved in someone's love life. When Gavin is intrigued about a certain topic, he won't stop talking about it no matter the lack of interest you showed. That's just how he was, and I'm sure people can relate. It came to a point where I sort of turned my focus out onto the ocean to just clear my mind. I'm looking out at the water for a good few seconds when I thought I could see something out there in the distance, bobbing along the water. As I took notice of it, I can make it out to be white, and it didn't appear to be moving. I told Gavin to be quiet and to look at what I was seeing. At first, he couldn't really see it and ran inside to grab his uncle's binoculars to get a better look. There, out in the water, was what appeared to be a container of some sort, possibly from a fishing boat or something. One side of the container read Turner, which we thought could have been the name of a company. As time went on, the container slowly made its way over to shore. When it finally washed up, Gavin and I walk over to it and just look at it. We then came to the realization that this so-called container was actually a freezer. What the hell is a freezer doing all the way out here? I thought. The chances of coming across a freezer was rare enough, and this area was strict with littering laws. I wasn't sure whether to open it, and I didn't want to risk tampering with someone else's items. However, Gavin went on to say that it was on his family's property and that if it was someone's, we'd have a good reason to inspect it. Right off the bat, the freezer had a lock on it, which could only be opened with a key. Gavin, being the resourceful guy he was, grabbed a few paper clips from the house and successfully picked the lock. It took a good minute to try and open the freezer, and when we do, the foul smell of this disgusting odor hit us like a brick. I've never smelled something so vile. We both shut it, and Gavin steps back and begins to vomit while I just stand there in shock. At this point, both of us are beyond disgusted, but we had to see what smelled so bad. Gavin stayed a few feet back this time while I put my shirt over my nose. We open the freezer, turn on our flashlights, and there we see it. Inside was what appeared to be a decomposing blob of flesh wrapped in a black garbage bag. I obviously can't show it, but a good portion of the freezer was covered in brown, red, grayish ooze. Even with our shirts covering our noses, the smell was unbearable, and so we shut the freezer once again. Gavin thought that it could have been a bunch of dead fish, but I knew right then that it was definitely not that. He recommends we leave and to call the proper authorities to report it to find out who it belonged to. Now, I should mention that Gavin's uncle has a neighbor a few houses down that people suspect to be a grow-op or meth house. Gavin becomes afraid that we might have stumbled upon their dirty work and would see us, hence why he wanted to leave. However, the chances that they did something like this were slim. After some more inspecting, we book it back to the house to call the police. Gavin had theorized that it could have been a gutted shark that had been left in the freezer and had fallen into the ocean from a boat. While his theory had a point, it wouldn't explain the wrapped garbage bags. Anyway, we call the police and they have a whole team out on the beach inspecting our discovery. 2 police cars turned into 20 as time went on, and Gavin and I watched the whole circus unfold from a distance. There were tons of police, EMTs, and some big police vehicle that read Crime Scene Investigation Unit. All the while, we both wanted to know what it was we found, but the authorities refused to tell us. Long story short, we still have no idea why the police didn't give any answers. Everyone we told laughed it off and said it was probably a dead tarpon and that the police had to keep this stuff confidential. However, I'm not so sure. I'm still convinced till this day that we found a human body. This happened around 4 years ago when I was a sophomore in college. My friends and I were out bike riding in a relatively dilapidated area when we found this really creepy building, which we later learned was an old industrial factory that had been closed down since the 40s. For context, it was the middle of summer, so we basically had all the free time possible. We did some mild exploring the first day, but quickly realized it would require more gear to thoroughly explore the entire area as it was too dark. Things like flashlights, headlamps, backpacks, and other gear. About maybe 5 days later, we come back to the factory with 3 of our other friends. We had also brought a camera with us as this type of content was popular on YouTube, so we wanted to get some good footage. We discovered there was only one main entrance to the building, the rest either being blocked off or hard to get to. One of our good friends, Kevin, had recommended that he'd go first as he was the most experienced exploring abandoned places. Now, the entrance was wide enough for a car to fit through and was pretty well graded, which made for a smooth walk. There were many rooms, old machinery, and rusting equipment throughout the building, but we avoided it for the most part. We were trying not to get lost or confused, so we stuck with each other. As we went on, the walls were littered with the classic abandoned graffiti. X was here, initials and dates, satanic phrases, drawings, etc. We even saw what appeared to be strange hieroglyphics on the wall that none of us could make out. Chances are there were just some random symbols people made up, but we didn't really care. At one point, Kevin starts leading us deeper into the factory where we come across 3 separate hallways. A few of us then bring up the idea to split up, but there was no way in hell I was doing that. Call me a pussy or whatever, I'm not walking into the dark alone. At this point, we started arguing amongst ourselves. Several of the group were nervous about going any further with the air quality being so terrible and without a good way to prevent us from getting lost. We were gonna have to rely on our quick thinking and flashlights to find our way. We walked for a while in silence, hearing nothing but our own movements and the steady drip of water coming from somewhere in the building. Then we stumbled across something that made us all stop in our tracks. In front of us was what appeared to be another hallway of sorts. It was long and you couldn't see much inside even with our flashlights. However, that wasn't what made us stop, it was the graffiti. The messages of whoever wrote this was ominous. The walls of the hallways were lined up with words written in white, all of them somehow relating to death and destruction. Things like suffering, pain, plague, hell, and Satan. It was absolutely horrifying, like why would someone come this far to write something like that? Despite our fear, we were all overpowered by our intense curiosity. We had to see what laid at the end of the hallway. Needless to say, we descend into the hallway and enter a singular room at the end. What we found was horrifying. On the floor of this room were various stones in a circle surrounding what appeared to be an old voodoo doll. There must have been hundreds of used tea candles and dozens of used cans. The walls had a few creepy monster faces poorly graffitied on them, along with several words in a sort of blood-stained font. What the hell was this place? Some strange ritual chamber? A room for people to perform cultural activities? We don't know, and we didn't want to know. We explored the room a bit more and eventually decided that we had to leave. Kevin leads us out of that hellhole and we start making our way back down the hallway when we hear the most haunting, evil laugh from behind us. We turn our flashlights around but don't see anything, and at that point Kevin tells us to run. We all scramble, running down the hallway trying to find our way back out to the woods. I'd say we were there for a good 5 minutes before we saw the light of day up ahead. Trust me when I tell you that seeing a light made us the most relieved we've ever been. We all make it out thankfully unharmed and made our way over to the car. Whoever or whatever made that laugh clearly didn't want us there. We never did figure out what that mysterious room was for, but just finding it and thinking about the horrible things that may have taken place there was enough to creep all of us out for a very long time. When I was around 9, I attended a summer camp at a Christian community center that my parents had signed me up for. It was a school for the most part, but they had a summer camp program right by our house, which is why I went. It was a nice camp, and I made a few friends within the first week or so. One of my friends, who I'll call David, connected with me very well and got to know each other for a good portion of the summer. He was just one of those people who you could always relate to and gave off that sort of energizing vibe. One night, the camp was hosting this sort of annual sleepover for all respective campers. All parents had to give their permission for their child to stay the night, with all food and utilities provided by the camp. Both my parents had agreed to it, even though I didn't feel like going, as David couldn't go. However, it was pointless arguing with my parents, so I bit my lip and told myself that I'd just push through it. Anyway, the night of the so-called sleepover came around with about 50 campers alongside 15 plus counselors. We would all be sleeping in the school's gym, which wasn't too bad of an idea. It was huge and was the safest place in the school, with it being a hurricane shelter. Our camp counselors told us it was lights out and to get into our sleeping bags. So fast forward till a few hours later, I was in my sleeping bag with my blanket I had brought when I for some reason wake up. I wasn't really sure why I woke up, but it happened so suddenly and so randomly. Everyone throughout the gym was fast asleep, so I decided to use this time to go get a drink of water from the fountain. Anyway, I'm half asleep and slowly get out of my sleeping bag and walk out of the gym to where the hallway was. As I'm getting a drink of water, I look to my left and see a man I had never seen before lurking by the vending machines. However, he didn't appear to be a counselor or any staff member, as he didn't have on a uniform. He appeared to be a dad. Middle-aged, glasses, a flannel shirt, just a casual guy. For whatever reason, he seemed to be acting cautious, as if he were trying to avoid being seen. I was a little freaked out, but I wasn't scared, as it's always never been easy to scare me. He of course spots me, and he immediately puts his finger over his lips like a cartoon character, making a hushing sound. His face looked stoned and his eyes were wild as he approached me asking where the nearest exit was. When I asked who he was, he hesitated for a moment before saying he was the camp director. Of course, being only 9 at the time, this relieved any worries I had, as I believed him. He kneeled down to my height, patted me on the back, and left through the doors. I then see him walk around everyone's backpacks and go through them for a couple of minutes before finally leaving. That being said, I was still scared and remember going back to my sleeping bag. The next morning came around when I was awoke to many of the staff and campers in a panic. Some were talking about how their phones, wallets, and even clothes were stolen. When camp security got involved, I had to tell them about the man from last night. I remember my camp counselors scolding me, demanding to give them a description of what he looked like and to make sure I wasn't lying. But being only 9, the description I gave was anything but useful. The only piece of information I really gave was that he had glasses and wore black clothing. The police were called, which led to an investigation, but as far as I know, there have been no leads to the man. There were cameras in the gym too, but the quality was ultimately too low to identify who he was. Long story short, my mom never let me sleep over anywhere until I turned 13. She pulled me out of that summer camp and put me into a new one that wasn't the best, but far better than the other one. That night will never leave me, as I became a little more wise as to what actually happened. Because of the paranoia, I always keep my doors and windows locked in my house. Some might call me crazy for worrying about something that happened a while ago, but I see it as a precaution. Anyway, that's my story, and I hope you can learn from it.